Yes.
Dr. Gray, can you repeat the question?
Yes, the polar ice cap, is it going to melt? No. Does it go through periods? It goes through multi-decadal periods like this. If you go back to the late 20s and 30s, it was way down too, and it came back. This is natural. The polar cap is not going to melt. The Northwest Passage will, it may open up for a little bit in the summer, but in general, it's not. All this stuff, Greenland melting and all that, to me, that's just, there's no evidence for any of that stuff. That's just speculated stuff.
So the ice caps in Antarctica in a lot of places are growing. You don't ever hear about that.
No, I strongly disagree. I think that globally you're seeing glaciers disappear. So
Yeah,
I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying
Let me
that-
tell you, did we have TV cameras in the 1850s or the 1880s to take pictures?
We had still cameras.
Yeah, what you see is such a small snapshot of the Earth's evolution. The Earth's been around for millions of years, and you're looking at ice caps for like 50 years. It means nothing.
So it's your contention that that's a natural event?
Yes.
Yes.
I strongly disagree.
Why? Where's your evidence? What's your evidence? Give me evidence. Go ahead. What's the evidence?
I think the changes you're talking about occurring on centurial, millennium type time scales, we're talking about things that are changing on the order of decades. And I think, so that's the big difference in my mind, is the rapidness with which things are changing.
Have you seen pictures of the American Revolution? The type of winters that we had around the time of George Washington, New York Harbor frozen over, the terrible winters. Okay, now all of a sudden we haven't had New York Harbor frozen over in 50 or 60 or 7 years. Climate changes. It will always change whether we're here or not. The Earth has been much warmer before in years past than it is now. And I will submit to you, even if you're right, even if I agree with you, what are we going to do about it? What can we do about it? We can't sequester CO2. We can't do anything about it. Is China and India and Pakistan, are they all going to go along with it? No.
No, I'm arguing that everything has to be taken in terms of its cost and benefit ratio. And I agree with you that trying to go and solve the CO2 problem will be a very expensive thing, and it's probably more than people are willing to pay. But does that mean that we should be willy-nilly just go ahead and waste energy? The concept was I brought up about the
I agree with you completely. I agree with you completely.
Petroleum extraction.
We don't hear any.
Why are we wasting that? Why are we burning fossil fuels in oil and petroleum extraction? Why can't we still cheap?
Real quick, you guys, if you want to have a conversation offline, let's do that, but I want to make sure we get to some other questions. So, Eric had a question, I believe.
Oh, well, all I was going to say is it possible that as one glacier melts, that others are getting thicker somewhere else, so the total ice mass is roughly constant?
That's what's happening. Yeah.
Just move up.
Certainly the glaciers come and go. Yes, we've had recent periods that a lot of the Alaska glaciers and other parts of the world have melted a bit. But that's the amount of energy involved with that is small, and some glaciers are melting, some are growing. Overall, we've been in a warm period since the middle 70s up to the last of the last century, so we would expect the glaciers to melt. Now more of them, the melt has gone down, and we should expect some of the glaciers to start growing a bit. In Antarctica, they are.
Bob, I think you have the...
Yeah. I just wanted to mention, it's probably been about 15 years, but I used to debate this. Believe it or not, this is an issue way back in the 90s. And I kind of gave up debating it because it's like beating your head against the wall. It's not a scientific debate as far as I'm concerned. It's almost entirely political, as you mentioned in your first part of your remarks. And so one of the points that I used to make very early in my presentation, it's kind of like I always thought it was like a 15-round fight. And I'd throw a knockout punch in the first round, which is what I'm about to mention. And then I keep debating, and people later in the debate would forget that the guy got knocked out in the first round. So I learned that you throw your knockout punch, and then you lead from range. And my knockout punch was very simple. You have, as you kind of touched on this a moment ago, you've had tremendous climate variability all through history. If you accept the existence of an ice age, of Manhattan being under a mile of ice, in order for that to melt, you had to have a higher temperature for a long period of time. Much more recently, the Little Ice Age, you touched on this. My favorite anecdotal evidence was on the River Thames in England. They used to have, up until 1814, they had ice fairs. Anybody ever hear about the ice fairs? And these ice fairs, they would have these things, kind of like a little, what do we have, these little flea market type things. They'd be on the ice, and they do it every year, and there were paintings and all kinds of things. This went on for 100 years. The last one was in 1814. You know why? Because the river doesn't freeze over anymore.
Yeah, and the reason it doesn't, the ocean currents have changed, and we don't have this big blocking action in Northern Europe that causes it to be so cold in winter. These are natural changes.
But the operative point here is that basically predates the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution really didn't get kicking until way later that century.
Yeah.
So the point is that you had other factors obviously causing very visible variability before the Industrial Revolution. Case closed. It has nothing to do with science.
Yeah.
It's entirely political. And what's the solution? It's always we need more government.
Yeah.
I want to go back to Mr. Schwartz's observation about how many other issues there are out there relative to not just the climate change, but there are so many myths. On this one, I worked with Dr. Corey, Dr. Charles Corey, who was with the Scripps Institute, and he placed a lot of the sensing systems in the 60s and 70s. He retired, and he worked with me on the book with the sections about the environment, and made the point exactly that probably, in his estimate, having placed all the sites. Second thing is when we're breaking the myths in the other areas, the key is I think one of the things that people in these types of groups have to do is to get out and get others to understand that in virtually every area that you see, whether it's in climate change or with the NSA scandal, what you're being told by official sources bears no or little relation to the truth, and that you have to get that emphasis through people to break this trust in what they hear from the government. And what I was hoping to hear or see is that, for example, the question is when you show that the actual observed data is falling now below the range of the model, why is it that you cannot get that in front of any of the scientists or any of the media to show that their model is already way off skew?
Yeah, well, there's a prevailing group think in our country on science, and I think the media is afraid to show this because it'll go against their whole what everybody thinks and what the government thinks and what all the science societies in America think. That you just can't, this will, although the obs aren't fitting the models well, eventually they will. Or that CO2 obviously warms, so it's got to warm regardless, maybe the models are, I don't know. It's a bit, but it's not going to keep going. There's a retrenchment now. You can feel it everywhere. In Europe, in Australia, in our own country, it's going to, this whole thing's going to die and weak. In 10 or 15 years, we're going to look back on this and say, how could we have been so naive to believe this stuff? I am absolutely sure that's going to happen.
So you're saying that there's no way they can ignore this for
That's
much
right.
longer?
Well, I like Lincoln. You can't fool all the people all the time. Eventually,
I
the
like what
chickens
you
will
said,
come home
but
to roost.
Unfortunately, this is not a scientific debate.
Yeah.
It's all politics, and therefore you can't talk anybody into anything. You could give them facts, and they're going to believe what they want to believe. And all I'm asking you all to believe, you don't have to believe that global warming is not a problem. I just ask you to think for yourself and understand that it's a very complex problem, and it's not as straightforward as the media would like you to believe. And another thing about the media on this global warming issue, I find it very interesting that this story comes and goes. When there's a lot of stuff in the news, you don't hear about global warming. When we have a slow news day, this is a very convenient topic for them to pull out and say, you know what, we don't have anything in the news, let's bring back this global warming thing. The media likes to make people hysterical, and that's what I think. I think it's political, and I think the media is making a lot of money because people like to read stuff about this. And from my experience, I haven't been able to convince anybody. Once people hear something, like my mom's this way. She's heard there's so much on TV, and I've tried explaining stuff to her that it's complicated. She goes, well, if Al Gore said it, then it must be true.
We got a question back here.
Yeah.
There's a narrative out there that says that because of climate change, we're seeing more intense storms and greater storms. Is your experience?
Just the opposite.
Oh, that's what.
I cut out a slide that I had.
That's what got him started.
This is absolutely poppycock. There's nothing to this with tornadoes, hurricanes, and everything. As a matter of fact, with hurricanes, the last 20 years, the global average of them has been going down somewhat. And if you look at the U.S., you can see the number of landfalling major hurricanes over the last 94 years has been going down as CO2 has been going up. This is, they'll turn to anything. I mean, when the globe doesn't warm, they turn to severe weather. They turn to this, they turn to that. It's awful. It's awful. I just can't believe that that people will defy the observations. I mean, just go against them, and some of the reason is because they get grant money to do it. That's what's in. What's in government is global warming, and we've got to do something about it. If you want to play ball and get money and continue with your research, you'll play along with us. It is awful. It is awful that, in my view, that objectivity is thrown out the window in the name of better politics.
I agree that the objectivity has been thrown out the window, and I just kind of want to remind everybody that we're all guilty of this. We've got a very well-studied, very well-versed individual here who tells us it's an extremely complex issue, and the human proclivity is to dive in and find the evidence that justifies our position and deny the science. We're all guilty of that on every side of the spectrum.
I would agree.
Right. I hope you're right. In 10
We all
years.
want a simple answer.
Yes.
That's right.
And I hope you're right in another 10 years that we see it go a different direction. Now,
I am, yes, I will be pushing up daisies, but you remember what we
push some good
said.
ones for us. Second point is that there has to be, this is stretching it a little bit, there must be a global conspiracy, because every country I've been to is following this global warming process. It's not just America.
It's called bigger government. They
So-
want bigger government.
Right.
Government
So-
always wants bigger government.
Along the idea of a
That's your
global
conspiracy.
government, along the idea of globalizing your government, that in itself is another human
Yeah.
proclivity, and they can use global warming to get there.
That's right, that's right.
It's a tendency.
Government likes it. They can control us more.
Right.
That's right.
So,
Dave and then
Dave,
Stephen.
Dave Moore.
Go ahead, Dave.
I'm curious, are either of you scientists familiar with the newsletter out of Cave Junction, Oregon called Access to Energy by Dr. Arthur Robinson?
Yes, I am. Arthur Robinson is a hero of mine. He's fought this problem right along. He's a great guy.
Were you and he exposed to the petition project?
I signed it. I didn't do all the work. He did all the work, yeah. But he's done marvelous work. There are many heroes out here trying to fight this global warming abomination. And they're being, and they take a lot of heat. People jump on them. There all kinds of stuff. It's become a very heated thing. It's like the McCarthy era. Have you now or have you ever been a member of any organization that says that humans are not altering the weather?
A quick point and then a question. So to correct this gentleman over here, my first research paper I ever wrote was my senior year of high school in 1977, was on climate change. The debate back then was, are we going through global cooling or global warming? They had no way of knowing. They until they saw which way the temperatures went, then they said, oh, it's global warming.
Wait a minute.
And they jumped on that.
I hate to do this. Where's the?
Oh, let me just say something.
Well-
I gotta say something on that.
Where's the pointer?
It wasn't 1992 or whatever.
I saw, this says exactly what, there was a newspaper article that came out, and it said, the glaciers are melting, sea levels are rising, temperatures are going up, people are getting alarmed.
There was a Time magazine.
And then it said, it was the New York Times in 1917.
Yep.
Okay, somebody at a conference that I've been to showed a graph showing the number of articles discussing global warming and global cooling as a function of year from 1880, and it's like this. Okay, the media has been hysterical about the upcoming ice age, and then it goes to global warming and we're going to melt, and then, this has been going on for 100 years. Okay, it's been global. It was the famous Time magazine cover of the gentleman with his beard freezing, and it said Ice Age, and we got to be scared about the Ice Age. So we've gone from 1977 to 2013. Actually, it started in the 80s. It was only 10 years later. They flipped in 10 years.
Yeah,
And we'll take one
I
more
would like to
question.
point out something here. Damn.
It's a very quick question.
In 19...
What's your question?
My quick question is that if you have a theory, there must be some way to present evidence to disprove it. But is there any evidence that can be or has been given that has been accepted as proof of not anthropogenic climate change of some form?
Well, that means we would have to understand, we would have to know exactly what is the natural contribution to climate change, okay? What do the oceans do? What do all the other factors? We had a radiation budget there. Is that well enough known? I believe it should be the other way around. I think those people that propose CO2 as this big problem should show proof. Proof is not showing me the glaciers are melting. Okay, that's anecdotal evidence, but it's not proof.
No, but they take
But they
everything
should
that
be-
happens in the climate as proof
Right.
of man-made
But I
caused climate
want to
change.
see I want to see statistics. I want to see from observations, other than the glaciers melting. And I want somebody to tell me what are the contributions from natural variability. Until we understand that completely, how do we know what's the human part? We only know the total. We know the temperature's going up. It's gone up since 1970, but do we know what the natural part of that variation has been? Is it really correct to say that humans have caused it all? I think when you say humans have caused it all, that's to deny that climate ever changed before there were humans. We know the climate changed before there were humans. It was just pointed out here, as recently as the 1800s, the climate has changed. And we know it wasn't humans because we weren't burning fossil fuels like we were. Okay, so I think the burden of proof should be on them, not on us to show what natural variability is.
Yeah, very good.
You got to prove a negative, which is next to impossible.
Right. Yeah, I agree fully with Barry there. I took this out of my talk because of time, but if you were around about 1910, the globe had been cooling, and there were all ice age reports about it. You know, we've been this long Holocene period for 10,000 years. The next change is going to be an ice age. Well, they were all talking about it, and then what happened about 1910 to 40 or so, the globe warmed. Now, I was in junior high school, and I gave a talk on the great global warming. The war was on. We were at the end of the war. We were probably going to win the war. But after the war, we were going to sink back into a new dust bowl era, and we'd have all kind of problems, and then the globe began to cool. And you remember, you all are old enough to remember in the late 70s, all the Ice Age talks come on, and now the globe then it began to warm, and Jim Hansen and all the warmers jumped out of the closet, and now we've reached a point since about 1998, there hadn't been any warming. It's probably been more level. But I predicted, because of the ocean currents, which I haven't had time to talk about, but these ocean currents, the deep ocean currents, can cause temperature change and cause the atmosphere to have more or less rain. And these processes are the main drivers for climate change on this between ice ages. We're in with the ice ages, you've got to bring in the orbital parameters and all this stuff. They are a fundamental factor. But when they're not dominant, as they've not been dominant over the last 1,000, 1,500 years, it's these deep ocean currents driven by salinity variations that are the main driver for climate change. Now that doesn't mean solar effects aren't a little bit, other factors, volcanoes, all this stuff can alter a little bit, but it's not the fundamental driver. Solar effects are not it. Most people are looking, well, if it's not CO2, it's solar. It's not. It's so little. The solar variations are so small compared to the other energy variations that they can't be a major driver. Now, they may have some small effect in the noise level. You will say, I don't believe in global warming, but I'll go along with it. You know, they're giving me, my wife needs a new dress, and my kids have got to go to college, and all these sort of things. And I don't want to rock the boat. I'll just play along. There's so much of that. And indeed, you've got to earn a living. What is the thing that drives scientists most? You think it's truth? No, it's a salary. You've got to eat first because you can become a scientist. And truth is a holy grail if you tell the truth. I can afford to tell the truth because I've earned my retirement. Now, hopefully they can't take that away. But if I was 20, 30 years younger and was out on the grant field, I'd have to change fields because I did not play along. It is there. It is dirty politics. They appoint the people in the NSF and NOAA and stuff. There's a policy to do this, and if you go along, fine. If you don't, they're going to get you. They may not get you this year, but your next grant may not come through, or if it comes through, it's going to be minimum money, or you're going to have problems. You're not going to be on any committees. You're not going to have any influence. This is the way it is. It really is that way, and I want to tell you.